I just can't wait to see how they spin this.
War wasn't always the American way.
I don't blame people for being skeptical of any FBI narrative.
We have a mass noticing going on. This presidential administration hasn't enacted the agenda it campaigned on.
If wars can be started by lies,
peace can be started by truth.
No more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
and no more empire.
What is going on? World of Liberty Vault. The Iranian regime operation is off the ground, kind of. We have a replacement supreme leader that happens to be more radical than his predecessor, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. We have Donald Trump threatening to bomb power plants and letting the mass slip that he wants to engage in war crimes. Nothing new there. And meanwhile, Israel is ripping up the West Bank settlements and invading southern Lebanon when no one reports that. But one guy that is reporting that is Wally Rashid, and I have him today. I'm so lucky to be graced with his presence. He's a guy a lot of you viewers have asked me to have on the show. In the comments section, talk to this guy. And we are today. Wally, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Right on, man. Hey, I took a look at your channel, and first things first, I want to just recommend my entire audience to go to your channel, Wally Rashid on YouTube. You cover U.S. foreign policy and culture and kind of the Israeli-U.S. relationship. I call it the unholy union, just about as good as anyone I've seen on YouTube. And you dive so deeply into what politicians are saying about it here, what people are saying about it in Israel and the Muslim world, etc. And it's just such a valuable resource. And you kind of convey it in bite-sized portions and bite-sized videos, and your shorts game is off the hook. So I'm just so glad that you're here with us. I have to recommend all of Liberty Vault. Go right now. Don't leave this video, but open up a new tab. Subscribe to Wally right now. But Wally, I just want to know first, before we get into it, like what got you interested in U.S. foreign policy, Israel, that relationship, culture? What brought you into the fold? Were you a dumb neocon like I was once and just turned the page on that chapter? Or where'd you come from?
Yeah, well, first off, I appreciate all the kind words. But I was born in Minnesota, but I'm Palestinian American. So I have family in the occupied West Bank. So, I mean, my family's village, it's next to the most violent settlement in the entire West Bank. They actually practice an ideology there's only one U.S. designated Zionist terrorist group, and it's the settlement next to my family. They're called Kahan Chai, that's the name, but the settlement itself is called Yitzhar. So I just honestly, I've always been really a big, I guess, activist, or just kind of sharing what's going on there, because I don't think people realize just how radical these settlers are. After October 7th, I lost a few, family friends. My family over there were just constantly getting attacked, having their houses set on fire. And I was just curious why the United States is so supportive of Israel. Because on paper, I started to recognize, okay, at least up until this current administration, on paper, regardless of how they actually act, the Republicans and Democrats on paper, they've always supported a two-state solution up until maybe 2016 or something. Yeah. And even that's always been on paper, but it seems like the actions are going in the exact opposite direction. So I didn't understand why there are these statements, but we're going in a completely opposite direction. And that's how I really started. I mean, this was in 2023, nowhere near as many people knew about AIPAC and the power of the Israel lobby like they do today. Yeah. So initially, I just started really looking into the Israel lobby, how politics work. I actually started working. There was an executive order that Biden had. It was to sanction violent settlers in the West Bank. It was like the only piece of legislation available to me. So I was working with some lawyers trying to sanction settlers next to my family. But I got a really good gist of how things go on when it comes to the power of the Israel lobby. And then I wanted to figure out where did AIPAC even come from? And that's what kind of set me off on a deep dive, looking into their history, the silent battle that they were having with John F. Kennedy, their predecessor organization, the American Zionist Council. Yeah. And then I started to realize, okay, there's a lot more here than just, a standard lobbying group. This is a very much so controlling lobby that's really put its bit its teeth into the United States in a way that it's very hard to undo, and it's not advantageous to the interests of the U.S. either.
Yeah, right on, man. And there's so much overlap between our two contents. I've talked a lot about, the history with JFK against the Dimona Project and against the AZC, as you know. And I guess coincidentally, that guy dies, right? And LBJ doesn't carry either of those policies forward. But thanks for just laying out your past, man. Can I just ask, like, side question? Where are you from in Minnesota? I lived there for 25 years. So.
Oh, no way. Okay. I grew up in Burnsville, Minnesota. So close to Eagan, 20 minutes out of Minneapolis. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, totally familiar, man. I grew up in Woodbury. I went to
like
Woodbury
30,
High School, and I lived in Minneapolis for a long time. So this is wild. I had no idea that about you, but
Okay,
small
cool.
world, I suppose, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man. Thanks for laying the foundation. So, like you said, the Israel lobby is being seen more by Americans than it ever has been before. I call it the great noticing, and I'm not the one who created that term, right? A lot of people have pointed that out. People see that it seems like U.S., especially foreign policy, is always pulled in the direction of Israel, and it seems most blatantly clear probably under Trump. Of course, this goes back a long ways, as you mentioned, but Trump is just so just blatantly pro-Israel and often admits it and even boasts about it. And now we're in an Israel-first regime change operation, not unlike some of the other regime change operations the U.S. has been involved in our lifetime: Syria, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, still bombing Somalia. My good friend Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com covers that theater better than just about everyone. But what's your current take on the status of the Iran war? Because we have lots of news today. I'm going to play a clip Trump talked about a supposed negotiation to maybe end this war. But where is this war? It seems like the decapitation strike that a lot of people thought was coming hasn't exactly brought a new regime to fruition. We seem to be at an impasse where the U.S. is entertaining boots on the ground, and there's an energy crisis. What's your just general analysis, and what do you think comes next?
Yeah, so, well, I had a former CIA analyst, oh my gosh, his name is slipping my mind, on my show previously, but he was telling me that prior to this war even starting, the intelligence communities went to Donald Trump and they basically, wrote up a memo on how this war is going to go. And they told him that a regime change operation is going to be unsuccessful. You can even, you don't even need to buy that piece. The UK, they have the MI6 also put together a statement saying a regime change operation is not going to be successful. If the United States goes into this war, what's going to end up happening is it's going to actually bring the people closer to their government, because they're going to see bombs overhead. They're going to see people being killed. And there were polls done prior. So, I mean, all the data was available. There was a poll that was done that showed that despite a lot of people not liking their government, a lot of people also liking their government, despite that, only 18% of the population, and this was a really generous poll, only 18% of the population supported the idea of foreign intervention. And it just said foreign intervention. It didn't even say bombs overhead, which is way less, So the data was there. Anybody that puts aside their biases, if you look at it rationally, okay, this is not going to work. If that's the case, then, and you're commander in chief of the United States of America, why the hell are you going into a war when all the data says this is not going to work? If your stated objective is regime change, the only thing, the only logical explanation to me is, okay, if the U.S. interest was regime change, because, Donald Trump right now, he keeps talking about blowing up Iran's missiles and these launchers and everything else. And okay, that's great. I don't really buy the numbers of how many they've taken out. But regardless, that's not in our interest either, because none of them even reach the United States. So we're taking them out for Israel. And none of it is in our interest whatsoever. So, and we already knew all of this going in. People will say it's because of blackmail. It's because he was bought out $250 million by Miriam Adelson. I personally think it's a mix of the two.
Yeah.
And so where are we even going from here? It's not going good, because the only U.S. objective really was regime change. Israel has different priorities, and that was also their number one priority, was regime change as well. But now we're stuck in this scenario where the United States just needs to admit, Trump's never going to admit it out publicly, but we're losing. It doesn't matter how many bombs we drop. we're not achieving whatever objective we fabricated, and now we want to get out of it. But at the same time, Israel really wants to stay in. And it was the most unnecessary war. If this didn't happen, the United States would be just, right where it was before. None of this had to happen. It was so unnecessary. And it just goes to show how much of a grip Israel has on our government.
Yeah, totally, man. And it goes back to something that Ron Paul, he's my hero. I'm a radical libertarian, always said about this theater. He said that, people in Congress always debate who should we support between the Israelis and the Palestinians, or the Israelis and the Arab countries. When, if you take a step back, especially if you're riding under the doctrine of America first, what about America in our interests? This clearly isn't in our interests, as you just said. Iran doesn't pose a single threat to us. Sometimes they don't even try to argue that it posed a threat. Sometimes they threw in the nuclear weapons threat, which of course didn't exist, even according to Tulsi Gabbard in her annual threat summary. But they don't even have ballistic missiles that can touch us, but they can touch U.S. troops in the region. So why is the U.S. engaged in hegemony and empire building for the sake of this foreign power? It's just so backward. And you just have so much control locked up in this Israel lobby, pushing these politicians in these directions, when you have the most ardent and fierce Zionists in our country projecting and accusing you and me of, anti-Semitism, and accusing us of attachments to foreign countries like Qatar and Iran, when the real attachment is to Israel on their part against our interests, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was another part aside from blackmail and, just him being bought out. And I guess this is blackmail in a way, but Israel, John Kiriakou, he's the CIA whistleblower. He stated previously, I like him a lot. And he was stating that likely what happened and what happened during Midnight Hammer is that the Israelis went up to Trump, Netanyahu, whoever, and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and nuke Iran unless you join in on this operation, and then we won't use nukes on Iran, not on the United States, but on Iran. And then I guess as commander-in-chief, you're looking at it geopolitically, and you're like, okay, it's in U.S. interests for a nuke not to be dropped on Iran, so we're just going to go ahead with the Israelis in order to do that. This is what John Kiriakou was stating. What I know for a fact is that this has happened before during the Yom Kippur War, because Jonathan Pollard, the convicted Israeli spy, he bragged about how that happened during the Yom Kippur War, when the Israelis threatened to nuke the Middle East unless the United States kept bringing in ammunitions. So I think that, Marco Rubio already said when that viral clip of him stating, we knew that Israelis were going to go in anyways, and it was going to cause a backlash. There was that as well. And if we, as the United States, the global superpower, can't reel this country in, it's a welfare state living off the United States, and we can't reel it in, then what's that say about the relationship? You were mentioning how, you're just America first, and I love Ron Paul as well.
Awesome.
And I agree. And, I try to set aside my biases that I'm ethnically Palestinian and I have family there. But what's really interesting, dude, and I love John F. Kennedy so much. There was back and forth letters between John F. Kennedy and Levi Eshkol, Israel's second prime minister, when David Ben-Gurion dropped out. And David Ben-Gurion was pushing John F. Kennedy for explicit security guarantees. Basically, they didn't have a nuke at the time. They did by 1967, before the Six-Day War. And the first prime minister of Israel said, listen, we're not going to build the nuke, which we know is BS, but they said, we're not going to build the nuke as long as you promise to give Israel explicit security guarantees that if Israel gets attacked, the United States will go to war for us. And John F. Kennedy, in very respectful political talk, he basically said "F you" to the Israelis, and he's like, "Absolutely not. We're not gonna go to war for you guys." And the Israelis wrote it out on a memo. They stated, I believe it was the mayor of Jerusalem that wrote this, and he said, "We're upset that the president of the United States, who would likely have strong sympathies for Israel if Israel was attacked, would not necessarily go to war for Israel." And John F. Kennedy stated very eloquently, he said, we recognize that to even ensure Israel's security, we have to be a fair partner in the region. And this is during the Soviet Union. So he's like, and I don't want the Arabs to be allied with the Soviets. I don't want them to get too close to the East. So I want to make sure that I'm a fair player here. And I treat Israel just like any other country. It means that we're going to be able to do good negotiations. And it's also not going to hurt U.S. interests, because we don't want the Arabs to be alienated from us. And I look back now and I'm like, damn, You know, if imagine if we just stuck to that one foreign policy that we're going to go ahead and we're going to treat Israel like every other country. We're going to impose a two-state solution. John F. Kennedy was attempting to impose it. He put forward a UN resolution. We wouldn't be in these forever wars. We're in these forever wars because Israel doesn't want a Palestinian state, so it wants to take out every country that is supportive of Palestinians, and it's using the United States as its lapdog to just carry this all out.
Yeah, exactly right, man. That's the clean break strategy, something I talk a lot of, a big break from the Oslo strategy. I can tell you're super well educated in this, but it happened in the 1990s where there was this break from Yitzhak Rabin, and he wasn't perfect either, but they decided categorically with the neocons to just take out Israel's neighbors so that they didn't have to provide a Palestinian state. I hate to say that's been remarkably successful, but at the cost of mass bloodshed, mass debt, inflation, the curtailment of our civil liberties back at home, etc. So it's just horrible. And one thing you mentioned earlier I want to speak to is that you said that if anything, this operation that the U.S. has launched for Israel, of course, has had the opposite effect of what we were purported to have gained by this. First of all, you just incentivize the Iranian regime, if they continue to exist, to fast track a nuke. Why wouldn't you? Let's be North Korea so that the U.S. isn't knocking at your door for regime change. And you galvanize that populace where I do believe that were some forces in protest against the government. I think that that's legitimate, of course. Like I protest my government. I think any people like John Locke and Jefferson thought have the right to alter or abolish their government when it's too tyrannical. But at the same time, you give them a patriotic banner to rally around, just like if any other country took out our president. So it just seems so counterintuitive from the jump. Let's get to Trump's clip today in talking about this after he had that threat against taking out Iranian power plants, which is a war crime. That's an indication you want to take this war to the civilian populace. Not like that's anything new for Israel and the United States, as we've seen in Gaza and all those other theaters. But here's what he said in what seems to have been a turnabout in terms of bellicosity toward this theater, and then we'll break it down.
He says you're not telling the truth when it comes to productive conversations to end the war.
Well, they're going to have to get themselves better public relations people. We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them.
Stop speaking with Mr. President.
A top person, don't forget. We've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
All right, so there you have it, Wally. It just seems like he's shooting off the hip. They're talking to a top guy, the most respected guy. He can't name him. Do you actually think he's just lying through his teeth, or do you think he's actually looking for an off-ramp here, maybe to avert this before it gets in deeper?
I think he's lying through his teeth in respect to the fact that they're negotiating and they have some sort of negotiations going well. I think Trump wants to get out. It seems like that's what's going on. I think he's recognizing that he's in way too deep. He's in over his head. I think it was just 2 days ago, though. I was on X and I saw, oh my gosh, was it Iran's foreign minister? He's constantly giving interviews. He was on an interview with Fox News, so this is he's pretty, and he made a post. And this was when Trump, when there was conversation that Steve Witkoff was negotiating with Iran, and he made a post on X just a couple days ago, and he was like, "Hey, I see news headlines stating that I've been talking to Steve Witkoff. That's actually not true. I'm not talking to Steve Witkoff at all. I'm not sure why this is being said. It might be to keep oil markets stable." And this was just 2 days ago. I don't think that if this was just 2 days ago, I can't imagine things be much better. The Iranians have been consistently, Iranian government officials are on X and they are stating, no, we want to stay in this war. Now, we can't take any government at face value. So who's to say? But I do know that right now there needs to be an establishment of deterrence. You know, when you're having war, somebody has to establish deterrence, and it's kind of right now going up the escalation ladder. Trump made that threat. Was it yesterday when he made the threat, or the day before when he said we're going to wipe out their energy? I think, and of course, then I saw a headline today. I didn't read into it too much, stating that now he's going to push that. He's going to push that back, and they're not going to actually. He's not going to actually take out their energy infrastructure. I think he started to recognize he's way too over his head. I think the U.S. wants an off ramp. Israel doesn't want an off ramp.
Right.
I think the EU right now is pushing Trump to get the hell out of this, because now it directly affects them. I mean, it affects the entire planet at this point, you know, the energy supply. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see how things go from here.
Yeah, totally agree, man. And what we heard even after Trump's statements to that effect was more denials from the Iranian government. It actually seems like Trump reached out through Italian channels on 2 separate occasions right at the start of this war to maybe pursue an off-ramp after that. And Iran was like, no. And it seems to me like they've just maintained that position that no, America has to pay for this, and we're not going to behave the way we did in the 12-day war. Why? Because you have the U.S. back at your doorstep, and I think they believe that that's inevitable. It's hard to deny that wouldn't be inevitable if the U.S. is already back, even after Trump celebrated that we supposedly took out their nuclear enrichment at Fordow and Natanz and Isfahan. It just seems like they're maintaining the same position through and through. Now, I hope there's an off-ramp. But then there's this potential exposition to take Karg Island potentially in the cards, with thousands of Marines being transported as we speak into the region. Do you think that there will be that kind of operation, or an operation to take, you know, the enriched uranium that could still exist, or any of these rumors that you're kind of hearing about?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to predict. What I will say is, when I interviewed, his name was Larry. I can't remember his last name now. The CIA analyst. I asked him actually these same questions, and what he told me was
Larry Johnson.
Yes, it was Larry Johnson.
Gotcha.
Thank you. He was telling me the idea in regards to the enriched uranium being, you know, taken out. He said that that's basically a death trap. That's an impossible mission. That's not going to happen. That's what he said. I think he's more familiar than I am. I think logically his statement is correct. Same thing with Karg Island. He was also saying, you know, I can't imagine that even if they went in, because I was thinking, well, couldn't just, you know, U.S. forces go in? It's an island. It's going to be easier. And he's like, okay, well, how are they going to get continuous supply of ammo? How are they going to get continuous supply of munitions? How are we going to be able to defend them? There's so many what ifs there, because the United States military is so powerful. But, you know, any further we go into this, we're not going to, the more deep we dig, the harder it's going to be to get out. So I'm hoping we don't, because this is a death trap for U.S. interests. There's so much we've already lost, and it's not just financially, by the way. It's also how other countries perceive us diplomatically. The level of volatility that we're projecting to the world. We don't look like a reliable partner with any U.S. ally at this point. So I just hope we get out. But, you know, the lobby, Netanyahu, the blackmail they have on Trump, the influence they have on Trump, it's so powerful. So it's hard to make that decision, because him acting rationally is not something based on his actions that we can believe he's going to do.
Yeah, it seems like there's a level of pot commitment. That's a poker term. I don't know if you play that in this part of the war, in this phase of the war, than there was in the first phase. And you're right. It seems like in some ways we're climbing the escalatory ladder, and that would be especially the case if there's publicized ground troops going into Iran, Karg Island or otherwise, for these missions, where it wouldn't be unlike potentially what happened in Vietnam, when just the mission creep expanded and expanded because you had U.S. soldiers potentially on like Karg Island that then become susceptible to attacks in ways they wouldn't with the security measures behind U.S. bases and things like that. So I think that's a real concern. I think you're exactly right. Wally, another thing that we saw was Joe Kent, the kind of the head of the counterterrorism unit within the DNI, one rung below Tulsi Gabbard, come out, resign over this war, say that what we've been saying and being smeared as anti-Semites, but now we have a guy from the inside saying what we know is true, that Israel pulled the United States into this war and there was no imminent threat. Here's him talking about the shifting red lines, or I put it as goalposts in this war, the propaganda to support it, try to convince Americans to support it. I think he calls it the red targets were shifted over and over. Let's take a look at this and then react to it.
Was they created basically a shifting red line or a new red line. So that if the president's red line was Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, we've actually got a lot of trade space in there for a deal to be made because of what I just described with the Iranian policy. Essentially, the Iranians saying, okay, well, we don't want a nuclear weapon. Well, that means we basically are at a point where we can start negotiating and we can come up with a deal. And the president is a fantastic deal maker. So if your goal is to move us away from any kind of deal and your goal is to move us into a conflict, you have to shift that red line. And that's where a lot of this, I would say, what became a de facto U.S. policy of Iran can have no nuclear enrichment. It was laundered through a lot of the different talking heads, Mark Levin, Mark Dubowitz, you've got the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, you name it. Washington, D.C. has plenty of pro-Israeli lobbyists who will come and say those things, who will publish think pieces on it, who will go on the media, who will run, op-eds in the Wall Street Journal to talk about this, why they can't have any enrichment whatsoever.
So there's his words. I don't know what you think about him. I don't think Trump is a masterful negotiator. He's still kind of attached to MAGA and has said some pretty charitable things about Trump, considering Trump already called him weak for this. But at the same time, he highlights this shifting goalpost where, we knocked out the Iranian enrichment. So now we're making it a new goalpost. He said no Navy and no ballistic missiles, no support for the proxies. It just seemed to guarantee war. What is your general thoughts about what he said there? Thoughts on Kent and his relative courage to do this and what it means to have, this high level official step out and tell the truth when it was most controversial?
Yeah, in regards to what he said, I mean, I absolutely agree. It seems that's also very obvious. You just look at the way the headlines are coming out, how the talking heads that he was mentioning, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, what they're saying. The Israelis want to stay in this war for as long as possible, and they want to make sure the United States stays in this war for as long as possible. I don't think a country that's bombing the lead negotiators is interested in negotiating. You know what I mean?
Qatar,
it's not their interest. And if I was Israel and I was just a manic leader that has no care for human life, and I want to expand as far as possible, then Israelis are also recognize that U.S. support is slipping, and this might be the last president that might actually be able to would actually do this for them. So I think that there's a time sensitivity for them that they need this war, and they're drooling for it so badly that they're going to make sure they do whatever they can to destroy any sort of negotiation to keep the United States in. And now it's not just the United States because the Israelis are recognizing, well, damn, it's not working out. We thought a regime change would happen. And now what we're seeing is Netanyahu yesterday giving a press conference stating, we need European leaders to get involved. Europe, come on in. Like he was doing this while he was showing the bombing around him. And now this is why we're also starting to see all of these, a lot of propaganda push right now with the EU. And they're telling EU leaders, look, like the missiles now reach Europe. You have to get involved. He actually wants to drag the entire world into this war. They will not stop until regime change is achieved. That's their objective. They don't care what happens to Iran afterward, but they want the regime toppled. So they want to keep the United States in, even if it leads to, even if it destroys the United States, they want to keep the United States in.
Totally agree with you. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to what comes next, I think we care about what comes next more than they do, because they're willing to accept an Al-Qaeda emir at the head of a country that we helped topple, first through Operation Timber Sycamore through the CIA, then a more direct escalation under both Obama and Trump. Trump escalated it actually in his first term early on. I'm sure you know all about that. So they just want a destabilized region. I think you put that perfectly. I think in the interests of greater Israel. So have you, Wally, ever interviewed Anthony Aguilar, or do you know him?
I know him, but no, I haven't interviewed him before, but I've watched a few of his clips.
Gotcha. He's a regular on my channel, a good friend of mine. We've developed a good friendship, and he was on the other night, and he talked about how he truly believed that Tulsi Gabbard's resignation is imminent. He thought that she would follow the example of Kent, but I don't necessarily agree. And one of the reasons I don't agree is because in her congressional testimony, I think she already entertained the prospect of that and just chose, she danced around some of the topics, but ultimately just sided with Trump. And here's what she said, and I think what is a key part of her testimony. I bet you've seen this, but I want kind of your take on this or how preposterous it is. Spoiler, I think it's pretty preposterous, but let's just take a look.
The intelligence community assessed that Iran.
1 second, we'll remove that old one. Here we go.
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False. This is the worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. You've stated today that the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated and that, quote, there had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of John Ossoff, but man, she is just making him look great answering or asking these questions. It's literally her job to present an annual threat summary. And by the way, even when Obama was in office and she was a congresswoman, she wouldn't just say, hey, only Obama can determine Syria is an imminent threat. No, she's like, this is a debacle. This is a disaster. We shouldn't have a regime change in Syria. And I'm going to meet with Assad. I mean, she staked her political career on this thing. I think this is pathetic. I think that she has been won over by the neocons, whether it's complicity, whether they're threatening her, whatever it is. I thought Tulsi was a real one in some respects. I never thought she was perfect. But what do you think about all this? And do you think she will resign?
Well, I mean, she knows what she's saying is BS. I think she's trying to save face. She also complimented this video with a tweet. She made a post on X earlier, basically saying exactly the same thing. It was just 3 paragraphs saying, this is my job, and we gather intelligence, and then we give it to the commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief makes the decision. And what she's trying to do is she's trying to shift the blame away from her.
Yeah.
And the way she wrote the post was very similar to the way she just spoke. And she's just trying to, she wants to shift the blame. I am shocked. I didn't know too much about her prior, but what I do know is that she does have a loyal base. She's young, so she has a long career ahead of her. She has a loyal base, and she's been, really pushing that she's anti-war. She's against war with Iran. So I don't understand why she's dying on this Zionist shill hill. It just doesn't logically, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of pressure. And you know how Trump is, that if somebody, decides to go against Trump, then Trump's going to really just destroy them and turn his MAGA base against them. But I'm disappointed. I mean, it just logically, it doesn't make sense. So there must be a lot of pressure behind her, something we don't see behind the scenes. I hope she resigns. I think at this point, she should have resigned prior to making this sort of statement, because now people are going to look back and be like, okay, so clearly she wasn't being fully authentic when she was speaking, which we know already regardless. I hope, I know you could tell by the way she speaks that she knows what she's saying is BS. She's not like Lindsey Graham, where I think he's so manipulated and bought out that he actually believes it. You could tell that she believes it, and she feels, I think she feels dumb as she's saying it personally, based on her body language. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. I can't predict whether or not she'll do it. I think she's going to be very disliked, and she still has such a long career ahead of her. So why is she dying on this hill? Just resign.
Yeah, man,
I think that makes sense.
I think that's a really fair assessment, man. And that was one of Anthony Aguilar's kind of angles, is that he thinks she's pretty ambitious. She might want to run for president someday. And this really is a sinking ship. I mean, this isn't popular. This is ripping up the right in the United States. Now, I do think there's more support for this on the right than there was for, say, the Epstein cover-up. But Trump is bleeding political capital on this, and he will more so if it becomes an energy crisis, etc. And then you have Tulsi Gabbard making, it just seems like pretty tepid statements in regard to this. So I think that's fair. I never met her. I did see her once last year at Ron Paul's 90th birthday. And even then, a lot of the libertarians in the audience were like, well, why is she here? Like, she propagandized for bombing Iran on the eve of it, suddenly saying that we have acquired intelligence, saying that they are weeks away from a nuke, when even Netanyahu wasn't willing to go that far when he was interviewed during the 12-day war. So we'll have to see how this happens. I'm pretty sure she's not going to resign, but I'm with you in saying that it really is, I think, destroying your political career to be tied up in this. And I think that, in some ways, the Republicans, or Trump himself, has decided to go down with this ship, to do it for Israel, to tank his credibility for Israel that he's in too far. So he might as well go full bore for the crown jewel of their regime change operation prospects and what they want. Do you think that he's acting in such a way that he just doesn't care? Like, he doesn't care about preserving his legacy anymore, that they already know that they're going to suffer a collapse in the midterms? Or do you think there's other dynamics at play?
I think that Donald Trump is he's very egotistical. So I think, I'm Palestinian. I feel like I'd be everything that Donald Trump wouldn't support, but I do feel like if I was in a room with him, he would be so easy. I could easily make him like me if I really wanted to, just by oh, wow, did you pick that painting? Oh, did you do this? Just anything to fill his ego up. So he was making a statement that after the initial strikes on Iran, right when this began, the Financial Times wrote a report stating that one of the first people he called was Laura Loomer. And did you read that? Did you see that? No. So she was within hours. It said within hours. One of the first people he called was Laura Loomer. Why? Well, because Laura Loomer showered him in praise. Wow, the majority of Americans love this. They're so proud. You're making America proud. You're such a great president. And it filled up his ego. And he was like, oh, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I am a great president. I am making America proud. So it's a mix. There's so many factors, it's not just, oh, it's this, it's that. But what I do believe is that everybody in his inner circle is making him feel like what he's doing is the best decision he's ever made.
Yeah.
And regardless of what we see on social media and whatever the polls say, he's only going to be taking in polls that support his worldview, like the CNN poll that somehow said 100% of MAGA Republic, And then he did you see the statement he made on it? He's like, oh yeah, I'm really impressed by CNN. That was a great poll they did. So
the first time he's ever said that about CNN, it's the one time they're not fake news, right?
No, exactly. So
so
it's like his brain, it's what's that part of your brain that like your reticular activating system? He's just taking in parts that suit his worldview. So whatever says, oh yes, you're the best president, he's going to take it in. Whatever says he's the worst president, he's going to trash that person on Truth Social. So I think there's that. I also think that he is an elitist in the sense that, he wants to do, he's an elitist and everybody around him, Miriam Adelson, everybody else, they have that sort of, they have that same neocon mentality. And I think he also thinks that people that don't support this just aren't as educated as he is or don't know enough. And they're, I think he's starting to actually believe the BS he's spewing about them being, radical leftist woke people. I think it's a mix. But no matter what I do know is that Donald Trump's always going to make sure he always wants to keep his ego inflated. So everybody around him is doing that. And he's going to keep doing that. He's going to keep acting the way he's acting as long as he's getting that praise from it.
Yeah, I think you really nailed how the neocons have been able to manage his ego and still get what they want, right? Because if you watch Ben Shapiro, and I don't want to sentence anyone to a life of watching Ben Shapiro, but I'll tell you, if you do watch Ben Shapiro, all he does is talk about how great Trump is, how wise his decision-making in this realm has been. He was on Bill Maher, I think, and said, like, it's not even close. Donald Trump is the best president in my lifetime on foreign policy. Well, yeah, you wanted the Iranian regime change. You're getting it. And Trump deliberately decided to side with the Lindsey Grahams, the Randy Fines, the Ben Shapiros, the Laura Loomers, the Ted Cruzes above the Joe Kents and the Matt Gaetzes, to some extent, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Thomas Masseys. That was a deliberate decision on his part. And I think you're exactly right that they've done it just through managing his ego. Of course, there's other dynamics. The Israel lobby, it's a powerful lobby. The military industrial complex, the bankers always want this. All wars are bankers' wars. So there are many dynamics, but I think that is part of the equation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go, Wally. Go.
I was just going to say, no, I mean, absolutely. And the reason, Zoran Mamdani, when he was about to meet with Trump, everybody said it was going to be the worst meeting ever. And they made it such a big thing. Fox News, was getting ready to just write all of these nasty headlines. And then it went great. And then afterward, he still talks to Trump and they still have a great relationship. I think it was maybe a few weeks ago now, Trump mentioned him again. He said, I don't like his policies or worldview or something, but he's a great guy or he's a nice guy or something. When Zoran Mamdani met him, the reason I said, the painting is because Zoran Mamdani, he saw a painting, I can't remember of which president on the wall. And then Trump said, I picked that out from the White House vaults. And then Zoran Mamdani during the interview, he's like, I want to mention that Trump picked out such a beautiful painting. And Zoran Zoran doesn't like the guy, but he knows that if he just compliments Trump on putting a painting up on the wall, then Trump is going to like him and it's going to benefit New York. So of course you're gonna, if you're a politician that wants the best for your people and you want to make sure you're getting federal funding, then of course you're just gonna go ahead and compliment him within limit without losing your integrity. But you're gonna go ahead and do this because it's gonna curry favor to your interests. So he's it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle, you can have the exact opposite political beliefs, but if you do that, he doesn't seem to care.
I know, man. The Zoran Mamdani thing really exposed how theatrical our political system really is when these people are supposedly, a clash of ideologies, but Trump is more close and kind and warm with Zoran Mamdani than he is with, like Tucker Carlson at this point, like Candace Owens at this point, like Marjorie Taylor Greene at this point, like Thomas Massey at this point. He literally is closer with Zoran Mamdani, and I'm not saying that Zoran Mamdani is al-Shara, but he's warmer with al-Shara than frickin' Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's the world in which we live now. Yep. I do want to ask you this, because this is a theory that I've heard from quite a few people on like the dissident right, some dissidents in general, talking about what the ramifications of this war will be for the American presence in the Middle East. And I kind of really disagree with this, but it's people that I respect saying this. Let's take a look at this clip from Professor Zhang. I'm trusting you know who that is, talking with Tucker Carlson about this angle. Then I'll tell you what I think. Then I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America, because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war. And American people don't even understand why America is still in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project.
Okay, so I'm with Zhang on just about everything in that. I have no doubt that a lot of the ardent Zionists that do want to carve out, their sphere of influence, their empire, essentially in the Middle East, do want to eject the United States from it. But I just don't see that being in the cards, because the U.S. has interests there with the GCC countries, with the petrodollar. They have, dozens of bases there. And, nothing's to say that any of the previous regime change operations they've tried in the region have culminated in the ejection of the United States, like Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia and Libya. So what do you think about that? Do you think that will be an extension of this war, is that the U.S. will get out of the Middle East, or are you skeptical as I am about that?
Yeah, so people have shared his clips to me before, and I personally, I fully 100% believe in Israel's ambitions for Greater Israel. That's absolutely, and we can discuss that separately. I don't really I'm not too convinced in a lot of his statements, not just this clip. I've seen a lot of his other clips. I think that his argument is using a lot of mental jumps. I remember because I saw a clip where he was mentioning Greater Israel, and he said that how Israel is going to become Greater Israel is the United States is going to pull out, and it's going to leave all its weapons across the Middle East, and Israel is going to take those weapons, and it's now going to build its empire with those, something along those lines, or where the United States is going to leave its bases, and Israel has access. I personally, and a lot of people like him, and that's completely fine. I just feel like the jumps aren't a set, don't make the argument sound enough for me to buy. Now, what this war is going to do 100%, and Ron Paul actually, he made a video probably 2 weeks now that I really, really liked. And he was talking about how he sees this war as one of the first signs of the fracture of the American empire. The Roman Empire, the Romans wrote dissertations. They wrote so many novels on while the empire was falling and crumbling. The Romans were talking about how they noticed that it's falling. And they write a lot about it, and I think it's really interesting. And one of the things they say, I was reading one of these, I can't remember who, but I was reading something, and it said something along the lines of that it wasn't the costs, it wasn't the wars that destroyed Rome, it was the costs of war and moral corruption and within the country that destroyed Rome. And I think that's applicable to every single empire. Ray Dalio, he also talked about this. I don't know if you follow too much of his economic policies, but regardless, it's not going to be the United States losing the war when it comes to actual military might in the sense that we think. You know, the United States, it's not going to be in that sense. It's going to be, well, Iran, you know, it might, but it's not going to hurt the United States homeland in a military sense. It's more so the cost of the war that's going to hurt the United States, and it's going to fracture the empire. And with him, the one thing the United States is going to need regardless is that we still have oil interests in the region. We're not going to dip out and leave the Gulf countries because we still need the oil. We still need to have allies in the Arabian Gulf that supply us oil. So I think that mental jump that we're just going to ditch them, that would basically lead to not just the collapse of the empire, but also that would lead to the collapse of the homeland. We can't just ditch these oil producing countries. So I personally didn't buy that. And right now, Israel is still too small to have to think about wanting to pull the U.S. out of the Middle East in the way that he's mentioning. Israel still needs massive U.S. backing. Although Israel's exerting a lot of influence in the Middle East, make no mistake, if the United States cut off Israel today, everything that Israel is doing now would absolutely end. It wouldn't be able to continue it. So Israel's not, you know, maybe if Israel was was already a middle empire, and it wanted to pull the U.S. out to take more, maybe I could buy it. But Israel's, it's nowhere near at that level to where it wants the U.S. out right now. It needs the U.S. I do think that what this war is going to force on the United States is it is fracturing the American empire. Ron Paul said that. I agree with that. And it's fracturing the American empire because, again, the cost of the war is going to hurt us. I mean, our national debt's going to it's nearing 40 trillion. It's going to happen within a few months here. We can't afford this at all. And Americans now, when you look at American polls, it shows that most Americans now, they're really starting to want to look inward. They're sick of this. The United States needs to pull out of the Middle East, but not pulling out away from our allies and ditching these Gulf oil producing countries and just cutting off relations. But it really needs to pull back from these foreign wars, from this sort of foreign entanglement. The United States could do it by choice, but what's going to happen is the United States is going to have to do it by force because we can't afford it anymore. And it's going to reach a point where we legitimately go broke. We're already kind of, you know, that's unfortunately the trajectory where things look like they're headed. But Ron Paul was saying this too, and I agree. He said, you know, it's okay. Countries don't need empires. When people talk about the collapse of the American empire, they think that you're being anti-American and you're saying, "Oh, I want to destroy America," and that's absolutely not true. But there's an empire, and then there's the country that holds the empire. Spain had an empire. Spain doesn't have an empire. You know, Britain had an empire. They don't have an empire. Ron Paul was saying, you know, as long as we have our liberties, you know, sometimes it's good to look inward and put the money back into the country instead of on the empire. And it's okay if we shed it a little bit and just focus inward. We still have to keep our interests around the world, but at the same time, we can either shed it willingly and do it in a method that is actually beneficial to U.S. interests, or what's going to happen is we're going to shed it by force because we can't afford it. And it looks like we're going down that path. And we don't need to be. That's the thing. They say the average lifespan of an empire is, 250 years? America's empire hasn't even hit 80 years yet. America's empire didn't start till after World War II.
Right.
It's not, America as a country, we're hitting our 250th birthday, but the empire itself has only been the past 80 years. We could have I truly believe the American empire could have lasted for another 100 years had Israel not existed. Because imagine the ramifications of Israel's existence and pushing us into all of these foreign wars, exporting violence back to America, the trillions of dollars we added to the national debt, the war in Iraq, they say, 4 to 6 trillion, and then include the interest on top of that. Now you're going to near the entire war on terror, 10, 12, 13 trillion plus. So imagine you just took that off our national debt. We'd be at a such better place. We didn't need to lose the empire this quickly, but now that we're starting to notice this, I think we should do it in a way that's at least preserving our interests as best as we can. Because, and this is aside from the fact that even aside from the costs of the war and America's economy and the national debt, we also have to look at our diplomatic relations. Returning back to a regional power, it doesn't mean you have to have allies everywhere, like actual good allies, not parasitic allies like Israel. And I think what we're doing right now is that this unrelenting backing to Israel, we're isolating ourselves from all of these other countries. And we're starting to become a bully. I don't know how you feel about it, but the way that the United States is interacting, not just with the EU, but really with countries all around the world right now, that if Israel doesn't like a country, it means the United States doesn't like a country.
Yeah, that's how the most dangerous entangling alliances, tend to be, is that you have the United States tied at the hip to Israel, and John Mearsheimer, I think, appropriately calls that an albatross around our neck, because it forces you to inherit, as George Washington said in his farewell address, all the adversaries of your allies, and that brings you into scuffles and controversies and conflicts and sanction wars that you otherwise wouldn't be. And I think you're exactly right. We're seeing the moral rot come from that. And Ron Paul is just infinite in his wisdom. It's something that Pat Buchanan talked about too, where he said that there's no such thing as a limited government empire. You can either have a constitutional republic or you can have an empire. You have to have one or the other. One comes at the expense of the other. And the United States, unfortunately, has chosen the empire. How we shed it, that's another question. I hope it's not through, as you said, like we're forced into it, and that, reason and virtue reigns. I'm not sure that it does. Ron Paul is something of a Cato the Younger of our time. I think he kind of stands mostly alone. There are some heroes, I think, that really get it, like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul to another extent too. But I think you're right there. One more question, Wally, before we get into a few super chats here, is that one of the things that's happened is an extension of the Greater Israel Project during this war, and it's getting very little coverage, is not only settler raids in the West Bank, which you've covered on your Twitter. Your Twitter's awesome, by the way, but also the invasion of Lebanon. And Smotrich is out there wide out in the open saying, we're going to incorporate southern Lebanon into Israel, essentially annex it. And that it comports with the Greater Israel Project. So do you see that as an extension of this war? Like, while everyone's talking about the war, they're doing what they can to extend Greater Israel too.
So I don't remember who. Well, yes, I do. And I also don't remember who said it. It might have been John Mearsheimer. The Israelis told Trump about this initiative. I mean, Lindsey Graham went on press and he said, "Donald Trump, please join." Did you see that? Join the Israelis in going to war against Hezbollah. But aside from that, what I do know is that there was communication back and forth between the Israelis and the Americans, and Donald Trump basically, I think it was John Mearsheimer, don't quote me on that though. Donald Trump basically gave his blessings and only said, "Please don't strike the airport there. Please don't strike the Beirut airport. Aside from that, like, you have my blessings." That just might be that just might be side talk. Who's to say? But what we do know is that America's allowing it, which means that we're not doing anything to stop it. So clearly we're supportive in the fact that it's at least happening, and we're not trying to reel them in. The Israelis are doing this under the cover of the Iran war because of the publicity of it and everything else. And so it's working out for them in that sense. And, they have their other interests as to why they want to do it right now. They also know that the United States is going to allow Israel to do whatever it wants. It's funny that because they want to make Smotrich, the statement he made today, he said that he wants the Litani River as Israel's new northern border. And what's funny is that if you look back to a video clip from Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League, he said that just as important as it is to get Hezbollah north of the Litani River, it's important to also control what's going on social media. So it's funny that the ADL also mentioned this Litani River, not in the direct sense, but there is this interest by Israel to go that far, and we're seeing the Jerusalem Post already starting to put the propaganda out as to Israel's new borders and the Promised Land. Now, it's not going to stop there, though, because that same Smotrich also previously made a statement last year stating that he sees in his lifetime that Israel is going to expand all the way up to Damascus. I don't know if you saw in 2023, he gave an interview on a podium. I don't know if you search up Smotrich on podium, West Bank, East Bank, you'll see that the podium was a map of Jordan and Israel combined. And he was giving a conference with a map of Jordan and Israel combined. And it caused Jordan to really condemn it. So I think, yes, I think the Israelis want that to be the case. I know that Israel is going to collapse. I know people talk about greater Israel. I know that's their ambitions. It's not going to happen. I personally don't believe it. I think logically, if I look at all the facts, it seems like this is actually expediting Israel's downfall. But I know that they're going to try to achieve it anyways. And who's to say, maybe they will end up at least occupying Lebanon. Maybe they might achieve that. Maybe they might achieve going beyond the Golan Heights, a little bit south of Damascus. I could see that. Maybe they'll start a false flag attack in the Sinai Peninsula, blame it on ISIS, and then say they need a stronger buffer zone and expand beyond that.
Well, they tried that in the Laverne affair. They'll just be repeating Laverne affair again, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So the Israelis, I know that they're gonna continue to expand a little bit more, but here's the thing: Israel's a separate country from the United States, but at the same time, Israel is an extension of the American empire because they made it that way. So they have a lot of massive power, they have a lot of influence, but as the American empire, if the American empire continues to go in the way that it's going, so does Israel. And what's happening now is if you look at Israel's internal politics, I mean, they're on the brink of civil war. If October 7th didn't happen, it's the best thing that could have happened to Netanyahu. I made a graph previously. I was reporting their Knesset assembly was collapsing every half a year since 2019. And they have their democracy is structured, their democracy, quote unquote, is structured in a different way. But the only thing that's keeping Israel cohesive is an external enemy. So they're coming up on elections, they say on October. They're having this budget bill that's supposed to be passed the end of this month. And there's a lot of stipulations. But regardless, Israel's internal affairs are so bad. I personally don't think, I think Israel's going to crack by 2028. Maybe I might be really, really optimistic. But if you start to really look into Israel's internal affairs, these Zionist settlers that want to expand, like Smotrich, they're part of a coalition in Israel, but not every Israeli has the same beliefs he does. Right. And there's competition in Israel for who wants to take power.
Yeah, he's pretty much on like the right end of Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition, and in fact is probably much more ardent of a voice in that regard than Netanyahu. Maybe Ben Gvir is too. There are others that are more adamant about this. It's interesting to get your projection on that. I guess we'll have to see where this goes from here. I do want to put up a few super chats. First of all, Claudia Johnston, thank you for the $50 super chat. That is amazing. I really appreciate you as always. Celtic RN8, one of my longest members here. Hey, Packers, I'm a Packers fan. I had a helmet, you can't really see it. But hey, Wally, thank you both for sharing your testimony and your collective wisdom. You're writing on the proper side of history here. Blessings from Virginia. Thank you so much, Celtic. Really appreciate you. And Celtic, please subscribe to Wally. I bet you've already done it, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Celtic had another one here too. All right. Not to be offensive as a Christian, you pray for the president of the United States every single day. Pray for your enemies. That is what it says in the Gospels. And hey, I consider Trump an enemy, but I do want a road to peace. And I hope that road is embraced. I really hope this is an escape hatch, even if it isn't. I do pray as well. Sadly, both he and Netanyahu both believe that they've been chosen. Both of them can't win. So who wins? Well, Celtic, in which context? It's hard to understand that. If you mean, will Netanyahu win and get his regime change operation? I don't see any way that there's a regime change operation that really comes to fruition in deposing the Khamenei dynasty without a massive ground invasion of maybe 500,000 forces. And maybe that's being charitable given the terrain, etc. What do you think about that, Wally?
Yeah, I think that if the United States considers a ground operation, it's a death trap immediately. We would fail epically. The whole thing it's like a fortress. If you look at a topographic map of the region, it won't work. It would be a death trap, and I doubt you would. I mean, I think I would assume that so many people would resign if that's even actually considered. It would never happen. And then the costs of the occupation after, or just the entire cost of the whole operation, assume that America would just the empire at that point is definitely split. It wouldn't work. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's a stretch. You would have to be a really, 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 you would have had to lose your mind as a president. So, I mean, I hope not, but who's to say?
Yeah, who's to say? Americans have no stomach from that, from the experience of Iraq and all the other regime change operations. I think like the tolerance for a massive ground invasion is as low as it's ever been in U.S. history. So I hope you're right about that. I hope that doesn't happen. I'm worried about the escalatory ladder that might lead to that, or even a nuclear strike in some regard, whichever party does it. That's what we can't accept. Above all, another one, third one from Celtic. Epstein may as well be our president. He and BB are fraternal triplets. Sadly, this is not hyperbolic. I'm quite sure that Charlie Kirk would agree if he was still with us here in man's world, secular world. Well, we know some of Charlie Kirk's last words was that I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause after Zionist billionaire donor pressure against his organization. Didn't like the fact that he had Charlie Kirk on stage, or I'm sorry, Tucker Carlson on stage talking about, hey, Epstein might be an Israeli agent. So that's what you have here.
Yeah.
Wally, what do you think about that? Did you follow the Kirk saga or any general thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I did. I mean, how fortunate for Israel that he died. He just when he was about to shift, and when he was the largest conservative talking head, especially to the youth, that was incredibly supportive of Israel. And he's more mainstream than he appeals to more of a mainstream demographic within that space than I think Tucker or Candace. I think he's more palatable to the right across the board. And he was starting to shift. He didn't shift once he died. He didn't make the full shift, but he was starting to shift.
Yeah.
And I think they recognized that was really existential to Israel in its interest. It was a perceived massive threat. So I just, it worked out real great for Israel. And a coincidence like that always end up happening, huh? It's
totally.
too much.
I actually didn't buy the shift at first until more and more information started to come out of Max Blumenthal's reporting on this. Candace Owens is reporting on this that showed with receipts, like, man, he was shifting. We went on Megyn Kelly on October 6th and expressed a lot of chagrin that people were questioning his integrity for being critical about minor things. If you watch her episode from August 6th, I think that puts it into view. But yeah, Charlie Kirk was on record, and this is documented. He went into the White House and tried to plead with Trump not to bomb Iran. Don't launch this war. And Tucker Carlson tried to do the same. And this is something that Joe Kent brought up with Tucker. I don't know if you watched that full thing, but he said, like, hey, Charlie walked in there and he pled to the president not to bomb Iran. And then, that guy that was in all accounts like a persuasive force on Trump was taken out. I mean, I guess we're just all supposed to believe that it's all coincidence, right? But last question before we leave you, Wally. I want to be respectful for your time, and I love your content. Again, Liberty Vault audience, please go follow Wally Rashid on YouTube. His channel is freaking awesome, man, like for real. But Wally, what do you think the political ramifications of this are on the U.S., not just in terms of like Democratic versus Republican politics? Like, let's look at even bigger picture. Like, is America going to be like even more distrustful of wars than they are now, more like hypercritical and distrustful of like Washington, the institutions? Or do you think that maybe like the Republican Party is taken over again completely by the neocons, and they're able to still steer us in a more warlike direction because it seems like MAGA has been totally co-opted?
Well, I think already the American people lost trust in their government a long time ago. I think that where the future is headed is, I know for a fact the people themselves, and so many polls have shown this, that they're over foreign wars, they're over neoconservative political strategy, foreign policy, and they're very anti-Israel on both the left and the right for different reasons. I don't think, a lot of the right might not be supportive of Palestine, but they're against backing Israel because of the impact that it has on America. That's only going to increase. We're seeing all of these billionaires trying to buy up the algorithms, buying up the news media, trying to control the narrative. And the more they do that, the more that every single poll that comes out shows that still the support is slipping. So I'm excited to see how midterms go. I'm not, I don't really, this whole left versus right thing, I don't really buy it much at all anymore. I guess I'm an independent in that way, because I'd probably vote on either side of the spectrum, depending on how the politician is. But what I do know is that on both the left and the right, they're over this foreign interventionism. And I think that's going to continue. And I think that it has to continue because, again, America can't afford this neoconservative foreign policy anymore. The Republicans are going to start to recognize that as well when the polls start coming out and they see, because all of these, they have tons of people analyzing campaigns, how they're going, how many votes they get. There's whole companies dedicated to doing just that, just analysis on it. So I think they're going to recognize that, okay, we're not going to be elected if we continue going this way. But then again, the older generation, unfortunately, there's a larger percentage of them that still are bought up in this Fox News propaganda.
Yeah.
And that, it's going to take a generation for change to happen demographically to boot them out, like in that way. And they still have massive influence, especially in politics. But I think the people, that's definitely where we're headed as a society, though. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing again. We have to go this way because ultimately now at this point, we need to keep money in America. Dude, things are so expensive. And there's so many things there's so many things in America that could be so much better than they are. And the only reason we don't have the money for it is because we're putting it overseas. So I think people are really starting to recognize that. And as things become more expensive in America, people are going to really start to wake up to it over time as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's so interesting to see this shift in support for Israel. It's just they've lost out. They no longer can control the narrative. It's totally slipped away. And it does break down on generational lines. A lot of it does. But you're having the right peel away for the first time really in my lifetime. I never thought I'd watch this happen, that, questioning the U.S. relationship with Israel for the first time, affecting vast swaths of people on the right. And Charlie Kirk played a role between the Zionist donors that want Hasbara or nothing and those younger activists that he wanted knocking the doors that, are sick of this. So this is a dynamic in play. I'm not sure that we'll see a manifestation of this in our political system for maybe 10 years because AIPAC and the military industrial complex, et cetera, still have such a stranglehold on our politicians. That lobby is subsisting right now, despite the loss of faith that Americans have in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. But at the same time, I think that politics is kind of a downstream from where culture is. And maybe in 10 years, you'll, instead of having candidates on the debate stage debate how much they love Israel, like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump did in 2016, to, no, I want to support Israel less than you. You supported him here, here, and here, and that was idiotic. I want to support him zero. Do you think that could happen even by 2028?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take 10 years. Absolutely not. Okay. Personally, I don't. Who's to say? But yeah, I mean, they would be way out of touch. The Overton window is shifting too. So Gavin Newsom a couple weeks ago, there was that viral. You saw that where he called it an apartheid state. I doubt he even gives a, I bet you his staff said, hey, call it an apartheid state. It's going to help with the young voters. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? I just don't buy it. It's because he's so, I think when I look at Gavin Newsom, I look at somebody who's so easily, I feel like he'll just say whatever gets him more votes. I mean, that's so many politicians though. Yeah. I don't really, I don't trust it, but that's already a sign that he recognized that if he doesn't put a harder line in place because of his viral clip when it came to AIPAC previously. Did you see that like a year ago where there was an interview and he was so nervous it looked like he was going to piss himself?
Yeah, I do.
When he was getting asked about AIPAC, and now all of a sudden he's giving an interview and he talks about Israel and relates it to an apartheid state. Where did that shift happen? It's nothing due to this. It's all due to, just analytics and what his staff is selling him. That's one sign we're already seeing. We're already seeing politicians campaigning on not being bought out by AIPAC. Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, she didn't win the District 9 seat in Chicago, but her Daniel Biss, her opponent that did win, his mother is an Israeli. He's a Jewish Zionist still, and he received funding from J Street, but he ran his campaign on being anti-AIPAC. We're already seeing politicians get scared of it. So they recognize that being AIPAC is a political liability. Now they're trying to get the Israeli lobby money in other ways. But I think way less. And when I say that I think Israel's fracture is happening by 2028, I think it has a lot less to do with the United States and really just Israel. You can't, Germany, it collapsed. The Third Reich collapsed when it was at its most expansive. So, when I look at Israel, I don't say that. I really say that because the more I look into the data, the more it actually is starting to validate. If you really look into Israeli politics right now, they're having a massive brain drain. All of the Jewish people that make a lot of money for the state, they're the secular Jews that are not religious, that are not Zionist zealots. They're not looking to be in the West Bank. They're all leaving right now. They're very sought after internationally, for their expertise. They're getting hired places and they're being put in war. So they want to leave. The Haredi Jews, which are the demographic that have a lot of children and they don't work because they're studying full time in yeshivas, which are Jewish religious schools, they absorb money from the state. So there's a lot of internal affairs right now. And if you look at all the stats, financially, it doesn't make sense for Israel by 2028. That's what I say. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think the state is fully going to collapse, but some shift has to happen. But I do think politicians are already starting to turn on Israel. This is part of the reason why I put out so much content, is because I want to shift the Overton window as fast as possible.
Yeah, God bless you for that, Wally. I think that's, again, reasonable analysis. You're so well educated and so knowledgeable on this on a level that I am not. So thanks for breaking that down. And I hope you're right that this is more hastened in its effects than I think. And maybe I'm just a total cynic because I've been optimistic about things before. We were supposed to think that Trump was the ultimate repudiation of Neocon Inc. in 2016. And now you have him 10 years later with exacerbated wars in Syria and Yemen, Somalia. Some of those theaters people don't talk about as much, but now you see this new war in Iran. But you're right. They've lost the grip on the American people and the stranglehold they have on their mindsets with this. So we'll see how it plays out. Wally, I had such a fun time talking about this with you. I hope you're willing to maybe come back in the future. Maybe we make it a more regular thing every quarter or something if you're willing. But just thanks so much. And is there any other last words? How can people follow you? Maybe even outside of your YouTube, if there's any other thing you want to point to?
I'm basically on every social media platform. So it's just Wally Rashid, same handle everywhere. Instagram, X, YouTube, all of them. You'll be able to find me. So I'd appreciate the follows there. Otherwise, no, this was so much fun. So definitely would love to be on again soon. I appreciate it, man. Dude, that's so awesome. Yeah, follow Wally Rashid on YouTube right now. He kicks my ass on Twitter too. Great Twitter follower. I'm really selling you, man, because I really respect you and your content. Check him out. Thanks so much. And thanks to all the members that watch this. Thanks for your super chats. I couldn't do it without you. I'm here because of you. So thanks again. We'll close out now. And peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one, as I say at the end of every video. Catch you in the next one, guys.
Thanks for watching Liberty Vault with Dave Benner. Be sure to like and subscribe to help fight the Mockingbird algorithm. Click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And until next time,
no more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
and no more empire.